Hi there. This is my first immediate post-episode reaction for House of the Dragon Season 1. For the first episode, Heirs of the Dragon. Wow, that was really good. Now, the way this is going to work is I really like doing long-form analysis more, that I think it's a cheat, and it cheapens the whole thing when you're just going, wow, I liked it, or I didn't, and there isn't analysis going on, but I realized a lot of people want an immediate same-day reaction, so I'm intentionally keeping this as close to 7 minutes as possible. First might run a little longer because it's the first one and I'm spending time explaining this, but this is like a trailer for I intend to by Friday come out with a longer full analysis, simply because we don't have all of the post-episode interviews yet, that I still have to go through, like the post-episode podcast with the showrunner, the inside the episode stuff, things that are going to come out in magazines in the next couple of days, interviewing cast and crew. That's not just a matter of, oh, I'll stay up all night. It's physically impossible for me to give a full analysis without that information yet. So this is always going to be like a trailer for the full thing on Friday, but this is my immediate post-episode reaction, and it's competing for attention with, I just finished writing up all of the notes for this in the episode guide on Game of Thrones Wiki, because there was a lot to go through, and I wanted to get it up to help everyone else with that. So, my first immediate post-episode reaction, I made a list of things, and I narrowed it down to 7 points. And throughout the week, I'm going to be expanding these into other topic-by-topic videos, but to keep it short, these were the 7 things that jumped out at me. Keeping in mind, I have read the source material, and I have been, going over it line by line for years. That I know what the story is. I'm asking, did they convey it well? And the big thing is that for the first time in a decade, we have a different set of writers, different set of showrunners. And if I had to say it, the top thing that jumped out at me was the direction and cinematography. Hello if you're new to my channel, but a big thing that why I launched it in the first place was the shocking revelation to me when I actually sat down and went through the Blu-ray commentaries after Season 6, because hype news sites had stopped reporting on these things, that I sat down, watched them, and it's just them talking about the actors' faces for an hour. And I realized that's all they care about. They're not... The things you guys figured out watching Season 8, I figured out then that it's just them fanboying out over celebrity actors. And this is a whole rich tapestry, my whole channel's been devoted to it, that it's this point where they go, you realize they made, like, the Sansa rape to show off Sophie Turner's acting ability, not for story reasons. They made Kit Harington have, like, Battle of the Bastards to pander him for Golden Globes. That there aren't in-universe explanations for these things, and we get so used to talking about this specific show. When you pull back, other shows aren't like this, because Benioff and Weiss had no idea how to make a TV show. They were self-admittedly novelists who had never worked in television before, yet they were micromanaging the directors and cinematographers to always have vanity shots of the actors' faces, tight close-ups, and they describe this in bizarre detail in the commentary when you listen to them almost fawning over it, like when they're describing Cersei's face in the Season 5 finale, and it's this quote I keep using where he goes, "This is so perfect. There's no dialogue and no motion. It's just these performances and these faces." And they say that in the Sansa rape thing of, we're doing it to show off these performances, these faces, and it became kind of a meme on my channel. That once you realize it's all about the faces, that you understand what they're doing, that they would rewrite the characters to just be in situations where they could show off the actors. Except they don't know how to show off actors. Their bizarre idea for showing them off is have static, tight close-ups framing their face like a beautiful painting. Like, even in scenes where Cersei's a prisoner talking to the High Septon, where in a normal show, because she's a prisoner, they'd be too tight close-ups. She'd be out of focus. The camera would be looking down at her from a downward angle to show how powerless she is. They're framed like paintings. And it wasn't just the tight close-ups of these performances. Like, we got behind-the-scenes production books where, like, the reason the pilot failed, like the HBO head mentions in passing, the first Game of Thrones pilot, there weren't any wide shots in it. To the point that it was like you wasted millions of dollars on one of the most expensive pilots ever for all of these sets, fully realized sets, for location filming, and the whole thing is just a series of tight close-ups and actor faces. And you also do this at night scenes with no lighting. There's only natural lighting, so you can't see anything. And yeah, that's what came up in Season 8, where it's just long tracking shots of Peter Dinklage's face centered in the frame, where they can't claim ignorance. Like, there's a person whose whole job is devoted to, I'm the lighting guy, and the lighting people, the cinematographers would be yelling at them, this is not how nighttime filming works, you idiot. And they'd overrule them. Or they'd be too scared to tell them otherwise. On top of this, there's quotes where it's like they kind of knew that the audience would get sucked into an actor intently crying on cue in tight close-up with no dialogue. And people go, wow, look at this acting. Like, this isn't acting. There's no context to it. Part of that is it's static. It's not moving. That it's a tight close-up that isn't moving. So there aren't, like, tracking shots. There aren't walk and talks like Aaron Sorkin. They're not doing anything. And the weirdest thing about this episode was we didn't have the drive to these performances and these faces. It was actual cinematography, and I didn't see that close up once. I mean, there's points where the camera's pointed at someone because they're talking, but just how much you saw people walking around that they had, and this is Sapochnik, he's the same director, but now unfettered by these ridiculous demands to, no, it has to be focused on showing off the celebrity faces. It was just moving around, it was showing things, and the biggest thing to me was also the number of montages they put in. Benioff Weiss also said they hated montages because it breaks your concentration on the faces, that they want people to be sucked into that. How can you say nothing's happening? Look at Sansa's face. Nothing's happening here. That they didn't even like doing film techniques like montages. And we had multiple montages throughout this episode, and big thing for me was the Gold Cloak scene, where there's camera motion, and there's some montage to it, and it's filmed at night, and they use day for night filming. It's like they were going down a checklist of, this is like, all of these are basic filming things that the other show would never have done. And it wasn't focused on Daemon's face playing off of him glaring at things. I mean, he was doing stuff in it. And this has surprised a lot of people. I mean, I just saw their channels like Quinn's Ideas of Ice and Fire, who said he wasn't sure if he'd ever even watch this, just stunned at the color gradient is normal now. That was another thing they did that this actually made sense at the time. They'd use a color gradient to show blue for cold places at the wall and orange color filter for King's Landing to show this is a warm place. But that ended up, desaturating the colors, and then by later seasons they decided it's winter now, it's cold, so even King's Landing should be desaturated in a blue filter, until it got so blue it was dark. And even though, the director and cinematographer, there's a whole person whose whole job is to tell them, don't do that. That isn't how cinematography works, and that was a big complaint by a lot of people, just how drab and gray and just plain not easy to watch physically the later seasons were, compared to, they had a whole interview talking about this. Now, they didn't use the color filters anymore, simply because it's all in one location, King's Landing, which also means they're not using the winter color filter, so instead there's all of these bright and vibrant colors, because it's the Targaryen Golden Age, it's the Golden Age of Westeros, where there's all this pageantry of all of the heraldry at the tournament scene just pops. It's all really saturated. It's not filtered blue or orange. It's just everything is saturated in its own color. So in terms of it's the stuff going on visually that you don't consciously think of when you're talking about cinematography. That's kind of the point. Just how much they used every cinematography technique, that scenes were driven by dialogue instead of how do I manipulate the actors into a position where they're making what's called soap opera face, where you're just staring intently and the audience is projecting meaning onto it. All right, this has gone over 7 minutes, but it's the first one, so I think I needed to have some time talking about that. And I don't have time to edit this in with visuals. You just saw that with just how visually different it looks, and it's the same director, Miguel Sapochnik, without these crazy orders to just focus on the faces, no motion, no dialogue, and with a really desaturated blue color filter because it's dark because it's winter. Versus this, where, again, not once did I see a really tight close-up. And when there were relative close-ups, it was because someone was saying something important. There was never both on their face and not saying anything. Or there were reaction shots, don't get me wrong, but they were quick. That it was just so weird that we've only seen Westeros visually in live action through the prism of these guys who didn't know how filmmaking works. Versus this is like, what if Westeros was filmed by directors from who worked on Succession or Breaking Bad or even just any regular show who know how to do basic filmmaking? Was strange in the montage, and even the sound work. They do sound transitions where you'd hear the last scene over the next scene. They did that relatively frequently, and again, the other show didn't do it because it takes you out of the moment. So, point one is actual cinematography and dialogue-driven scenes. And tell me in the comments if you remember, I've been saying this for weeks, how different this show will look when there's other people in charge who actually either know cinematography or are smart enough to stay out of the director's way and let them do their job. Instead of, hi, I've never worked in TV before, I'm going to micromanage you. Sorry to devote 12 minutes to that. It's just that is the entire show. It covered every aspect of it, just how it's a different presentation of it. And you see how this affects things like dialogue when they're like, well, we don't even need dialogue. We can just convey that with a look. Because no, you're bad at writing dialogue, and you've convinced yourself that when an actor is making an intent face, they can say that. So I don't want to just be complaining about the old show, don't get me wrong. It's hard to avoid the comparison that this is, hey, how can I be blamed for that when the whole world is, I don't even want to watch this show, or the scrutiny it's under to not screw it up like Game of Thrones did. And again, I'm not as focused on story thing because I know the story, but just, I like what David Lightbringer said. He went to an advanced screening that it looks just more like Westeros. That visually, that we're so almost trained after a decade that the static camera work we saw since Game of Thrones Season 1 isn't the only way this can look. This can look very different and just alive. And that the camera's following them around while they're having dialogue scenes, and it was just different. It's a different format. It's so different. But that can be a whole discussion unto itself. I agree with a lot of other reviewers like Lightbringer and the other advanced reviewers that the standout things from this episode were Paddy Considine's Viserys, Matt Smith's Daemon, and the surprise was Sean Brooks' Emma Aaron. That Viserys, like even Martin is in the promo thing saying, this is better than what I wrote, because his Viserys is kind of a jolly fat man, though it's kind of, the historians have filtered it through, it's an in-universe history book, that he's like King Lear in this, and, his wife dies, and, he is a joke. You see parts of the book him before, as I said for months now, why would he be this jolly fun guy after his first wife tragically died? That you see bits of that he's this fun, pleasant, everyone loves him guy, but not in an over-the-top, boorish Robert Baratheon kind of way. Like, you see him cracking a sex joke at the beginning of the small council, but in a snarky way, and the other lords think it's funny, but he's not like dirty, and he's little things like, hey, Rhaenyra, you've come back. Yeah, I'm here, and oh, well, they're killing pirates. I think you just described good news. That he's fun and pleasant to be with, and people like him, and he's, holding a tournament for the realm. They convey that, but at the same time, that obviously with all the death and stuff, it was really good acting and emotional, and really I became, over the course of an hour, invested in this character as he portrayed him. Daemon was also amazing because, and just from the behind the scenes stuff they're saying of just how much Matt Smith knows, he is the one making suggestions that, no, I play Daemon as sympathetic and misunderstood. Yeah, he's a problem child, but in his warped way, he has loyalty for his family, and even Viserys picks up on that. He doesn't want the throne. What he wants is approval. And you see that there, but little things like they said he's the one who, when Rhaenyra and Viserys are in shock, is actually trying to comfort Rhaenyra at the funeral, that he has this weird sense of Byronic loyalty to him. That Matt Smith gets it. Comes from a long line of it-getters, as they say, that he fully understands his character. And another difference from the other show where, like, they would also micromanage the cast members when, like, Lena Headey would say, Cersei should be crying in this scene, and they told her no. That how much Matt Smith is driving this is he's a smart actor going, well, no, I'm going to play Daemon as more sympathetic here. And they talk about that at the inside of the episode. A question, which I briefly skimmed, I haven't even gotten through the podcast yet, but that does raise the question of, on Game of Thrones, they acted like they were listening to the cast members and behind the scenes, but they were like really hyping up the one or two times they listened to them, when in reality that isn't what was happening at all. They were not listening. But in this, for Matt Smith at least, they're letting him do this because he really seems to understand the character that well. That, I mean, he's a bad boy. He's mad, bad, dangerous to know. He's kind of flippant, but he's also moody. And how can anyone love him? He's just a good-looking, brooding rebel who plays by his own rules. I don't see what the attraction is, but you see how all the moping and stuff, he's very complicated, and it's amazing. I agree with other people saying, just from the first episode, this will be one of the, if there's justice in the world, they should really be talking Emmy nominations for this. I don't know if he'd win, and he deserved to win. I know the Emmys are a joke at this point, but you should be discussing this as he's the next, I've been saying, he's like the Jaime Lannister of this, that he's this very divisive gray character. The way we were saying, why doesn't Nikolai Coster-Waldau have a nomination this year? We'll be saying that about him for the entire award circuit, even the real awards. And the surprise was Emma Aaron, that Sean Brooke just blew it away, that they could have just had Emma been a token character for a minute or two. They could have mentioned her in dialogue. Instead, they built this out really well. They were smart enough to build up her relationship with Rhaenyra. Basically one really big scene, but it was still just that this will affect Rhaenyra for the rest of her life. The relationship she had with her mother, the love she has for Viserys in the bathtub scene. I like that they got the medieval concept that she sees it as her duty to produce a male heir, and she says as much, but she feels bad about it. But we can't just keep having dead children. Maybe it'll never happen. And wow, her performance in the C-section scene, that you get sucked in, that you have to stop and go, this isn't real, that this is her acting, that terrified that they're taking a scalpel to me, and then screaming in pain wildly that she's being cut open and dying from it. This is all acting. And she did it really well. And this is the type of stuff that grounds people. This is what we come for the low fantasy of George R. R. Martin's world. Ice demons aren't scary or dramatic to me as much as woman dying in C-section, because it's real. Because it happens. That is a more realistic thing, or even getting an axe to the face. But realistic things that people die from is scarier. But just, I'm talking about her in terms of her acting now, that was brilliant. She was just, you could tell everyone loved her, and she was kind, and I don't know how you managed to emote motherly so much. Part of it was dialogue through one scene. That how much she managed to convey in that one first scene at the birthing bed, talking to Rainier about, the child bed is our battlefield. How much she managed to convey of their relationship with her specific intonations on certain, and it's because it's not just her looks, it's because the intonation on every line of dialogue carries so much meaning, and her delivery, and the writing in it, you smell like dragon, that they managed to make this fully realized character that we will miss, who is only in one episode. So those were the three standouts. I'm not going to blame people who didn't get a lot of screen time, that it's in terms of their performance. I don't think there was ever a weak point. Um, that, like, some people going, oh, Allison is the weak thing of episode one. She didn't have that much screen time yet, so that's an unfair example. Of course, I really liked Millie Alcock, and I think part of it is, I really liked, mostly from like the funeral thing on, when she isn't just, hey, I'm at the tourney, but talking seriously in Valyrian. You see her attitude shift, and from then on she's different. Because the point is, she was kind of disinterested in things before that, and this was the defining thing of her life, that her mother died. All of this leads me to point three. Point one, cinematography. Point two, the three standouts, though I think Millie Alcock was good. But point three is, I'm not blind praise for this, I really liked it, but the first 15 minutes are a little clunky, and I can't think of how I'd improve them, just they're a little clunky with exposition, necessary exposition, that I can't think of how else I would convey it. And a lot of the first 15 minutes were used in all of the behind the scenes promos. We saw most of these scenes already out of context and re-edited together, of Rhaenyra talking to Alicent about them arriving in the dragon pit. So it was hard to enjoy that. But like, the first small council scene in isolation was really good. Of Rhaenyra being the cupbearer, of Corlys talking about, well, there's this thing called the Triarchy, it's this alliance in the Free Cities. Great scene. The Emma Aaron scene, also great. It's just, I think that trying to convey the Rhaenyra Alicent friendship in a handful of scenes, again, they weren't bad scenes. It's just, you're asking too much of them, if that makes sense. That they weren't standout scenes compared to like the Emma Aaron scene, and that the flow was a little clunky. But I don't know what I change about it, because you need to show they're friends. And that was actually a clever scene, showing Rhaenyra is disinterested in the Nymeria history lesson, but it's like that whole lazy but smart thing, that smart but lazy thing, that at the end she goes, okay, this is who Nymeria was. She did this, this, and this, that she knows the material already, and she's kind of bored with it. That's why she isn't trying to study it. That is a character trait thing, that's development. It's just, I don't know, with the pacing on that, sometimes you get something with so much exposition, it gets overwritten. Not, again, not bad. It's just, I only really got the pace of the episode once the Gold Cloaks scene started. Maybe a little before that, the isolation, the Daemon introduction of him on the Iron Throne, that was cool. I like to think that there were even people complaining when the teasers came out. Why is Daemon sitting on the Iron Throne? Don't these writers know that's treason for anyone but the king or the hand of the king to sit on it? That, yeah, and I said, well, I think Daemon in universe is being very flippant, because he's the rogue prince. He's the kind of guy who would do that. Yeah, when Harold Westerling sees him on the throne, he curses, oh gods, and then Rhaenyra in Valyrian says, it's treason to sit on the throne if you're not the king. It's like they mentioned that, yes, he is doing, because he's the rogue prince. He doesn't care. He's badass. So yeah, that made sense. But just, word I'm looking for is the flow of one scene to the next was a little clunky in the first 15 minutes, and that's very delicate. The beginning is most delicate place to figure out how everything is balanced. So I wouldn't change anything. That even like the reading Nymeria scene was fun for character exposition about what Rhaenyra is like, but it only really made her compelling that my mother died, and they talk about this in the behind the scenes thing of just how much this is making her grow up and everything really fast. So everything from 15 minutes in with the gold cloak scene on was just pitch perfect. I mean, even the first 15 minutes I was praising, wow, the cinematography is really good in all this. But from then on, it's like, this is what Daemon creating and leading the gold cloaks has looked like in my head for like 7 years or something, like note perfect. That like, and they're hacking off the hands of thieves, they're castrating rapers, that they're doing it at night, but the filming is still good because they can do day for night. There's Daemon being this Elric like knight cutting people's heads off. The whole sequence was just amazing and dark, and the moral grayness of then at the council. Like, I'm curious what people think, or general audience, that he's like, the city is lawless and I have restored order. And that whole, did you, I've been posting this joke in the social media stuff already. Wow, you really busted up that brothel in King's Landing pretty bad. Did you really have to castrate so many rapers? Well, you tell me. You had a pretty good view from behind your desk. That Daemon is just vigorously applying himself to any position he's in. So from then on, I was hooked. And not just because of that scene, because every subsequent scene, everything flowed together really well. And thinking back on it was also the cinematography thing of the transitions they would use, where even the sound of one scene would bleed into the next one, or they'd do montages so they weren't even separate scenes, were a lot better interconnected from the Gold Cloak scene onward. The other ones, you can tell, and this happens on everything. It's happened at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, that when you rewrite the beginning a lot, when you're trying to figure out the right balance of exposition, which is crucial. But the scenes didn't flow together as well as they did from about the remaining 3/4 of the show. For about 15 minutes onward, every scene flowed together, literally, sometimes with montages. So that's just a testament to how good the transitions were in the rest of the episode. The first 15, I was a little okay, but story-wise, a few things got simplified, but I don't really think it affects anything. Like, as much as you expect things to be in a normal world, we're not unreasonable. Things need to be simplified. And on the other show, they took that to the point of absurdity, and they did it unnecessarily. But this, I don't really have an issue of. Case in point, saying that the Great Council's final vote was between Viserys and Rhaenys, when it was between Viserys and Rhaenys' son, Laenor. It would be complicated in the first voiceover intro to this show in 2 minutes to introduce that many characters, to go, well, there's Balon, and there's Aemon, and she's Aemon's daughter, but he's Balon's daughter, but she has a son. That's too much stuff to fit in. That I accept as a hardcore book fan, and because it's more the spirit of the story than the letter of the story, that whole principle that, yeah, it was a vote between Rhaenys' bloodline and Viserys' bloodline. And the vote for Laenor was an indirect vote for Rhaenys, can at least go through a woman, the claim to the throne. So changing it from that to, well, it's actually Rhaenys, it's essentially the same thing, so I don't have an issue with it. And other little things like that Corlys Velaryon is on the Small Council, when at this point in history he wasn't, because he quit in protest when they passed over Rhaenys. But all the things he's saying at the end, this happened in the other show and I accepted it. Things characters say in letters and written correspondence in a show you need to do face to face, and I don't have an issue with that. That's smart. It's part of the format change, that everything Corlys is saying at the council, like the Triarchy and the Free Cities is attacking our shipping lanes, we need to do something about it, is stuff it says in the book he was complaining about through letters and written correspondence, and they just made him master of ships so he could be in the room, so the camera can be pointed at him having a dialogue scene with Otto about it. That is fine for me. So some things got moved around, sometimes condensed or simplified, never in a way that I really disagreed with, So good. That's point four. Some things got moved around, and I'll talk about that, but that's not even nitpicking. That's just, it's different, but it's fine. Point five. Thoughts on the sex and nudity levels. I don't think the nudity was gratuitous by the standards of other HBO shows. And that's the bar I'm setting, just, relative to other HBO things. And this is not Lord of the Rings. This is a world where people have sex and go to brothels. I think it was filmed as much as any other brothel scene on a show like Westworld or Sopranos strip bar or something. It's that whole thing. The definition of gratuitous is you know it when you see it. That there were points when there were just random brothel scenes in like season 2 of Game of Thrones, which this serves no purpose and it's eating up time, that you really are just focused on showing off the naked women. Whereas this, it didn't feel gratuitous. It was always moving the plot along. It wasn't sexposition. It was showing Daemon being moody in one scene and then another. In terms of gender balance, of course, it was a nude scene for Daemon for Matt Smith. So it's roughly equal proportion of male-female nudity there. That so far, and I've seen this in other news sites saying this is handled as well as any other HBO show, whereas compared to other HBO shows, the show run by 2 guys and no women, and not even a full writing staff to at least go, dude, you're really enjoying the naked women, and it's too much even for us other guys. It's detracting from the story. It's distracting you. You're eating up time that was meant for other things. That they ran away with that and got obsessed with it. That this was as much as I'd seen another HBO show. I didn't have a problem with it. Violence-wise, though, well, again, the whole, you can show a man being bludgeoned to death with an axe to the face in graphic detail, but you can't show a naked woman. That whole thing, that's that joke. But realistically, violence-wise, that they're amputating arms and stuff. This is a medievally show. I mean, I'd be surprised that people would still be squeamish at that. Some of the faces getting caved in things were a little bloody and stuff, but nothing we haven't seen. So I never thought they were reveling in it, because the point was, wow, this is a bunch of wanton violence from a pent-up society of these guys trained to be knights, but there's no war. And you see how the tournament's like playing at war. That it served a narrative purpose for that. And even, the amputations and stuff is showing how brutal and nuts Daemon is. But the violent stuff is really leading up to the Emma Aaron C-section scene, which, given all of their comments, I don't think was a problem for me. I can see how other people would. And they were smart enough to talk about it in advance in that Hollywood Reporter interview they did, where they said, we want to show how dangerous childbirth was in medieval level technology, that in the story this is based on, 3 women die in childbirth, that Emma dies in childbirth in the book. It doesn't mention a C-section, though it well could have happened, because it's one sentence, she died. That's usually what you die from. So I think it was brilliant acting. It was amazing acting, and I think the amount of blood and cutting they showed, it's not like it was really down into the gut stuff. They show the initial incision just to go, oh look, it's a line of blood. And it's more her reaction to it, and then it's blurry that you're looking over the shoulder at when he's pulling through stuff to get to the baby in there. Then you start seeing the baby and stuff. I don't think that, because it wasn't as in focus, I don't think that was gratuitous. It's just establishing it's really bloody, and the point when when you see arteries severed, when you see the baby come out, you can tell an artery has been severed because it's spurting. I don't think they were reveling in that violence. And again, it's the whole gratuity. This is what I want you to talk about in the comments. Was that gratuitous, or was that what they stressed both in that text interview with Hollywood Reporter, and then with the Inside the Episode also just talked about it, I just saw, that we wanted to realistically but not gratuitously show that you stood a good chance of dying in childbed, that this was dangerous, and that the patriarchy would value that you need to keep getting pregnant until you produce a male heir. and that Rhaenyra's kind of angry about. She kept getting pregnant, and we knew it was dangerous, we knew it was life-threatening, but damn it, she had to produce a male heir. Even though I think you see Viserys is not a bad person, he's devastated by this, and the doctor, the maester bluntly tells him, in neither, and as the showrunner pointed out, as Condell said in the inside of the episode, there is no scenario in which she is going to live now. Either both of them die, or we painfully and cut the baby out of her in a C-section, and she will die in much more pain, but the baby might live. That's a horrible but rational choice. But I don't think they presented him as bad for that. They showed he was overwhelmed and suffering from this, and it's part of the. It's not so much that he would. It's before you get to the point where you're asking for an emergency C-section. That's far down the road. It's the fact that he's the one who kept pressuring her to get pregnant in the first place is what led to that point. Even if he made the only decision to be made at the moment, it's, yeah, you did keep, and he himself says, I kept pushing for a male heir instead of a female one. It killed her. I could have just named you the heir to begin with. Yeah, so point one was cinematography. Point two were the standout performances. Point three, first 15 minutes didn't flow together well because you tend to rewrite the opening exposition scenes a lot. Like I remember Lord of the Rings, they said we rewrote hours of dialogue between Gandalf and Saruman because so much of it was exposition, and you have to fine-tune how much exposition you put out. We had so many alternate cuts of it. So I get that, so the first 15 minutes, and I wouldn't change it. Point four, a few things were simplified, but not in a terribly bad. They got the essence of it. 5, gratuitousness, both with nudity and with violence. I don't think so. This felt like a normal person made it, but it was still, like a prestige level drama. Point 6 and 7 now. Point 6 is short. Just, I like their designs for, as they've said in behind the scenes stuff already, the era of decadence. They keep stressing that, and I think they conveyed it well, that having Rainey say there hasn't been a major war in living memory since Maegor died almost 70 years ago. And the way they direct it and show it, that this level of violence that they're having at the tourney, because it's all a game. The tourneys and all the impractical designs on their costumes, they stressed that like, you're not supposed to have giant dragon wings and castle turrets on your helmets. Swords will catch on those. These could never work as real defensive gear. And, like, Kristen Cole's actually doing well because he has simple armor that isn't, like, going to get him killed. But that, and some people disagreed with that there's all these, erotic tapestries in the Red Keep. Well, look at medieval art of, like, satyrs and nymphs. That's, that kind of thing happened in real life art. And I understood they're trying to show this was an era where they felt that because they defeated the faith of the Seven in the Faith Militant Uprising, it's like, the church can't tell us what to do anymore. No one can judge us. We are more akin to gods. We are above all judgment. And that this is like before Baelor the Blessed burned all the pornography and stuff, burned all the copies of Mushroom, or almost all, unfortunately. Mushroom survived. But yeah, I can see they're going in this art style. It's very decadent and opulent. Even though the Valyrian artwork, they said this whole thing of Valyrian stuff is brutalist, because that's what the Valyrians were like, but the Targaryens have, like, this decadence on top of the brutalism, so you, like, have this stone brutalist architecture with soft erotic tapestries laid over it, which is an interesting contrast to show how much they've changed since they were from Valyria and became, these basically emperors ruling everything. But generally, I like it on the subtle, not just the costumes for the tourney, but the dresses for the noblewomen, just the people in the crowds. They look like early Renaissance, not earlier medieval. That they look better dressed than people did in Game of Thrones, because this is kind of a lost golden age when things were better. And they stress this so much behind the scenes stuff, that this was their golden age, this was their apex. So technology was better, wealth was better, quality of life, the way people dressed was better. So In things both great and small, I think they conveyed that pretty well, from the design of the city, to the props, to the costumes, to the thematic stuff with the tournament of we haven't had a war and they're just venting their stuff that you need to, sometimes you need to hit people over the head with that of go, yes, this is them venting their frustrations from there isn't a war. So I think they conveyed the era of decadent stuff pretty well. Point 7, prophecies, the last point here. I, of course, reported on advanced leaks about these, and they were for the most part accurate. I thought there was a point where Daemon would talk with Viserys about Valyria. That might be in a later episode. I might have gotten the order wrong. But he is clearly building a model of Valyria that might come up. But instead it was the same conversation. Viserys says, well, you remember Daenys the Dreamer and the Doom of Valyria. Well, this is Aegon the Conqueror had a dream about the White Walkers. And okay, that was like both things in one scene, and maybe they'll talk a little more about Valyria later, but same difference. They in dialogue say who Daenys the Dreamer was, refer to Daenys by name. One way or another, that was in there. And the other prophecy stuff is all that he said, I had a dream that my son was wearing the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. And this will affect him, and this is new to the show. It's not from the books like that. Daenys was in the books. And lastly, some people go, oh, this is heresy, saying, oh, it isn't in the book. I genuinely think this might be from the books. And we'll talk more about this later. But I've already said so much because it leaked out early. I don't know how much more I can say about the specific scene, the way they did it. I like the way they phrase it. The Targaryens were trying to save the Seven Kings. We need to unite the world of men. I was terrified. I heard a rumor that they would mention the Night King by name to try to tie it into the other show. No. They don't even say the term White Walkers on screen. Even though they're not stupid, they know there's legends of why does the Night's Watch exist? Oh, because the legend of the White Walkers. Why does the Wall exist? That if Viserys heard if he was told this prophecy that this apocalyptic winter will come from the north beyond the wall, he can put two and two together. He knows what the White Walker myth is, that it's probably the same thing. And maybe they'll talk about that next episode, because we saw in the preview they were doing it a lot more, that he's going to show her the glyphs on the dagger that have a prophecy on them. We'll check that out too. But for now, it's mostly just stuff I already said in the leaks. I got to admit, my heart skipped a beat, and just this ear-to-ear grin when he said, because this wasn't in the leak, that Aegon called his prophetic dream the Song of Ice and Fire. Okay, that really got me, fanboying out and excited. And the next week preview, which I know isn't this week, that you see Rhaenyra slowly reading the glyphs off of the dagger. He will be the prince that was promised, and his will be the Song of Ice and Fire. I gotta admit, that really hit me in the heart here. Just, wow, that sense of wonder that I haven't had in a very long time. It felt significant, even if, we know how it ends. I get that whole thing of, I think this is a split continuity. That we'll get a different version of A Song of Ice and Fire later, I think. But yeah, the prophecy stuff I didn't have a problem with. Some people will, I won't. It was pretty much what we got in the leaks anyway. The performances were amazing. Wow, there's an episode for the first time in a long time. There's a World of Westeros episode that I want to rewatch for pleasure. Not just to take notes to make fun of it, like a Season 7 episode, but I would rewatch this for pleasure. I'm going to be rewatching like the Gold Cloak scene. Or some of the other parts of it, or the small council scenes, that when I want to rewatch it, when there's complex dialogue, and when the whole thing of when no one watches the show anymore, when it rewards rewatch, because every little inflection that different characters have in a fast-paced, multi-sided conversation matters. When they're at the small council, it's not just, and he shoots him a look, but there's subtlety and meaning to everything. So this is obviously longer than the 15 minutes that I'm usually going to allot to these things. We're now clocking in at 45, but it's the first episode, and I had to devote a lot of time to just talking about the different visual aesthetic that there's real cinematography now, and I'm going to do a better, shorter version of that with visuals in the coming week of they actually know how filmmaking works. And it bothers me, though, that people would praise Benioff and Weiss or even criticize them that this not a lot happened this episode. Even people criticizing it couldn't verbalize what I came to the realization, because the camera's just pointed at the actors' faces and they're not really doing anything. And people would try to read meaning into it, and it's just step back and realize this is a parlor trick. That the music is swelling while it's pointed at a character versus just how much dialogue was in this, and we'll measure that from the subtitle tracks. There's a words per minute measure. I'm very interested in that, of just how much dialogue was in this. Just how much story they managed to convey. And yeah, we're talking about, oh, well, they left out the Lane. They mentioned Laenor at one point. Not by name, but, well, she has a male heir. That they crammed a lot of story into 60 minutes. This was a ton of exposition. And the other issue is, I know this story, so I'm not as good of a judge. I'm going to be interested in watching cold reactions from people who didn't know the source material, of can they follow through on, well, this is Lord Beesbury, and this is Emma Arryn, and this is who Daemon is, and this is Jaehaerys and Rhaenys. I hope so. I really hope they can follow through on that. But for me, as a fan of these characters, yes, I felt this was realizing them on screen, that TV Viserys is, I wouldn't say, it's different. It's all your headcanon stuff about Viserys is on screen. That this is the Viserys I would make, based on Fire and Blood. That, I imagine he's a lot more sad in real life because his wife died. That he wouldn't just be this jolly joking guy, particularly because his health declined. So, other than people who didn't get a lot to do yet, like the Velaryons didn't get a lot to do, neither did the Hightowers, I'm not going to hold that against them. Mizaria, some people have been hating on. She simply didn't get enough dialogue for me to hate it. I mean, she didn't wow me, but she was barely in it to first episode. The first episode is about Viserys, Queen Emma, Daemon, and Rhaenyra, and bits of Alicent they're starting to set up. Are there things I would change, like a minor detail here or there? But no, this was really good for me. And just little things where they work in Easter eggs from other stuff. This was really good, and I can't wait to see the reaction of the world to this. And it's not even that the story is one thing, it's how they're presenting it so much better. It is so different. And because that's why we were saying this is a good world and a good story. It's, you need people who know how screenwriting works. So 45 minutes in, this is my immediate reaction. I am not editing this. It's going to be audio only, so everyone can watch it when they get up Monday morning. And I'm going to be working on thematic videos, like 7 to 10 minutes each, every day of the week through other I might play around with it, if doing a topical video and like timeline stuff, but I know this was good, and it blew my mind, and I loved it. I just worry about, will the world give it a chance? Well, telling about these 7 points I brought up in this, and please like and subscribe. If you're new, hi there. I've been covering filming reports on this for the past 2 years when a lot of people weren't, and I feel strongly about it, and I really believe in it, and I hope we can have a good journey with this. So, upwards and onwards, I can't wait for next week. And part of me can't wait for it, and part of me, I don't want it to come because I don't want it to be over quicker. But yeah, I'm excited again. A lot of feelings are going on here. Just the wonder of, because that surprised me. It wasn't in the leak that, and Aegon called it the Song of Ice and Fire, and then Rhaenyra saying, reading the dagger in the next week thing, and his will be the Song of Ice and Fire. That touches a spark inside of you when something's a real story and you believe in it and it's exciting. So I hope we'll see a lot of amazing things with this.